If I can introduce Dick Gleeson then as our first speaker. Dick is a Dublin City planner, and he has overall responsibility for strategic forward planning and development management in the city. He's a member of the senior management team in Dublin City Council and sits on the board of the Grange-Gorman Development Agency and the Academy of Urbanism. He's a committed urbanist and has championed the development of the 6 themes, a systems type framework within Dublin City Council, which are now embedded within the city plan. Those 6 themes, which are, I suppose, cover the key dimensions of life within the city, are economic, social, cultural, environment, movement, and spatial and urban fabric. He has a major interest in sustainability, and one of the things that he has tapped into is what's called the natural step, and has brought this into play within the planning within Dublin City Council, and particularly within the City Development Plan. He's currently heads up the Strategic Development Zone Plan in preparation for Dublin Docklands. Okay, I think it'll be fairly obvious why we would have asked the urban planner to talk to us about the city and the future of the city, and where we have a part to play in that. So if I could ask Dick Gleeson to come to the podium, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Stephen, for the introduction. The CDETB must be fairly well connected. I don't often get a chance to speak in George's Hall. I suppose cities move in cycles. When you think back to Dublin in 1985 and where the city was, and maybe looking around the tables, some of you had a view from the pram. But that's when I started to work, joined Dublin City Council. And when you look at the city today, the changes are very significant. And I suppose the question is, where will we be in another 30 years? I got a chance to go do a good few J1 visa visits to the US when I was a student. And at the end of it, I got to go to Chicago in '74 and '76. And the heart of Chicago at that time was very much a donut city. I got a chance to go back there last week, and I was at a conference, Global Urban Challenges, with 30 of the world's biggest research universities present. And the center of Chicago is now absolutely stunning. And Mayor Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, liked to say to the youth, look to the center, there is your future. However, outside of the center of Chicago are some of the most affluent and some of the most difficult neighborhoods in all of North America. And the 3 main universities in Chicago were there, and they're all in the top 30 universities in the world. But because of their endowments and their status as private institutions, the university presidents don't feel comfortable about committing resources to changing the vectors in those neighborhoods. On the ground, however, there is an increasing evidence of university involvement. I just wonder as to the vision and role of the CDETB in terms of their focus on the neighbourhood and hinterlands in which their schools are located. In the last 30 years, planning has changed quite a bit. In the past, and maybe even before the 1980s, planning tried to simplify the city, segregate uses, retail here, office there, residential there, and it tended to produce a very sterile city, a lot like some of those problematic North American cities. I think today we approach the city in a completely different way. We try to embrace complexity and try to structure it without stifling innovation and its creativity. And I suppose you can describe that as urbanism, which is accepting the richness of that complexity. And in terms of our holistic approach and trying to provide a systems type thinking that manages to tackle with that complexity. We've come up with the 6 urban themes, as Stephen has said. And again, they are economic, social, cultural, environmental, movement, which is all about every kind of traffic and walking and cycling movement, and the physical fabric and urban form of the city, number 6. And what this allows you to do is to state your value system for each of these. And having done that, you can actually look forward and say, what is the shape of success for each of those over the years ahead? It prevents you thinking incrementally about everything. And if you find that a little bit hard, perhaps you want to talk about the qualities of that shape of success in the city under those different themes. And then you can actually go back and say, what are the disconnects? What are the blockages preventing us from getting there? And of course, looking forward allows us to not be completely paralyzed by incrementalism and trying to deal with the current situation totally. So the big aspect of those 6 urban themes is that they can flip up to be strategic. They're all interconnected, but they can also flip down to focus on local plan making. And the reality is that they don't always have the same weight, but the absence of 1 or 2 of those themes in any significant plan is really a serious flaw. But I suppose we then asked, how can we ensure we're going to be sustainable? And we wanted a scientific basis to sustainability. So we looked out in the world for the best systems type approach we could find. And we came across an absolutely inspiring oncologist from Sweden, Karl-Heinrich Robert. And he started the natural step. He was worried about one aspect of medicine saying, this is causing more damage than that, and you have to get upstream again. So what he set out to do and achieved was he got agreement among the Swedish science community on the fundamentals of life on the planet, no less. And then they came up with 4 principles that would ensure we were in balance with that environment and with the human side of the equation as well. And those 4 principles were to stop using metals that the earth can't reabsorb, to stop using chemicals that the earth can't readily reabsorb, to protect your clean air, soil and water, and to meet human needs. And then he had a really interesting methodology to go along with that. He had a systems type approach on 5 levels. And level 1 was to understand the total systems you operate in as a school, as a city, or as a neighborhood or whatever. Then to say again, what is the shape of success? 3rd level was, what is your strategy for dealing with that? And the 4th and 5th level was, what action and tools have you got to bring to bear? So this has hugely informed the city development plan, and he had a very interesting, quick, user-friendly way of getting started, an ABCD. A, awareness of that methodology, of those principles. B, baselining, because if you make some progress, you really want to understand where you came from. C, some form of compelling vision that's a bit tough, that you want to aim for. And D, down to action. And I suppose it would be worthwhile for CDETB to think about the total systems that you operate in as an institution. And some of those may be the fact that you have to recognize that there is a huge legacy of social housing in Dublin City, inner city particularly. Almost the area between the canals was a total social housing city in 1985. The middle class had more or less deserted the inner city at that time. There's also been a huge change in the multicultural makeup. Immigrants are very ambitious. They want to learn, but they have huge challenges. And responding is really resource intensive. And then you have to deal with that institutional lack of a flat playing field, in that private fee-paying schools and private non-fee-paying schools select students, and all they have to do is answer the points equation. Whereas when you look at the remit of CDETB, it's absolutely so wide. You're doing an amazing job, but you actually need to be able to win friends politically and funding in terms of being able to answer that challenge. Now, what I'm going to do is take you on a quick run through some of the context of the city and to make some comments as I go along. We're talking about cycles in the city. This is just a favourite slide from just before 1800, and those black dots represent the homes of members of Parliament in central Dublin at the time. This is Fitzwilliam Square, the All-Ireland Tennis Championships in 1899. And now we just look at a map of character areas in the city. We've had this map for about 10 or 12 years. It's stood the test of time very well. Each character area is defined through building fabric, institutions, economic activity, social fabric, street pattern, or whatever. And you see areas there like Temple Bar, like Trinity, the North Georgian Core, South Georgian Core. And you have about 25 character areas making up the context of Dublin's inner city. What you have here is eggs of cultural clusters sitting within that character area. Obviously ones like Temple Bar, but also emerging ones like the Parnell Square one, where we will have the new home for the Dublin Library. Also interesting is to look at the economic engines within the character areas of the inner city. And the inner city is really the powerhouse of the Dublin City region, which again is of national strategic importance economically and culturally. And the vision really is to create a powerful economic activity in each of those, and you can look at those economic activities as education or tourism or retail or ICT or a whole range of financial services emerging left and east and west of the inner city. When you look back to 85, the inner city had shrunk. It really was made up of the Georgian area to the southeast, the two retail cores, Trinity College, and the areas east and west were in huge difficulty. So what I want to do is just briefly look at that central area and what's been happening. So Temple Bar has had a huge impact in terms of cultural profile on the city. It was driven by this master plan, which made use of redundant land in Temple Bar at the time. And what happened through this plan was a search for new national cultural institutions sitting around new urban spaces and all connected by interesting walking routes. The problem with Temple Bar has been that the tourism side has almost been too successful, and the visibility of the cultural side has been challenged and continues to be challenged to this day. But Temple Bar Cultural Trust did a fantastic job over its 20 years and began to develop interesting areas in the realm of cultural services, and was responsible for building Culture Night in Dublin firstly, and it's now moving throughout the country. I suppose the next area I'd just like to mention is Trinity. It's a university at the heart of Dublin's inner city. I really liked the vision for Trinity enunciated by John Hegarty, its last provost, who talked about the old core of learning at the heart of the university. But then he talked about the porous zone around the university, where he wanted to build real and virtual academies in literature, music, photography, creative engineering, and so on. And between the porous zone and the rest of the world was the marketplace. So he was building this vision of his university in a very interesting way, recognizing its context in a very urban setting. And of course it's moving in very interesting ways. This was a very brave move to open up Science Gallery, which again people thought mightn't take off. It's just been hugely successful, and it's really a discovery of science through the arts. And also the Trinity Long Room Hub, which is an amazing building architecturally, and that new square works wonderfully. And again, it's rediscovering the arts through the arts and PhD students who work in this area. Moving on to Collin Street, Main Street, Dublin. This happened in 1966 for political reasons. Architecturally, it created a problem. O'Connell Street is a long run in linear urban design terms and was arrested by the column of Nelson. But by the 1990s, it had become very cluttered. There was episodic criticism coming from everywhere. This is not really representing us in the way we want. So a team was set up within Dublin City Council, completely revamped, drew up a plan, implemented exactly as the plan had said, doubled the width of side pavements, created a new symmetrical central median, had a competition for the spire, and I suppose we're still going through a process of trying to build cultural and retail sustainable content on O'Connell Street. But being part of the Grand Civic Thoroughfare that will link us to Parnell Square and the cultural content up there is a move very much in the right direction. And you can just see the line of that Civic Thoroughfare linking Christchurch with Parnell Square. When you move west of the inner city, I suppose since 1985, the inner city has been moving towards the west, towards Houston, and eastwards towards Docklands. But first of all, in Houston, a huge transport hub, very large brownfield sites. The plan provided for 5 million square feet, 500,000 square meters, about 2,500 homes. Half of those have been built already in Clancy and in the area beside Imma. And what it's really doing, it's setting up the center of gravity of an arc that's developing at the west of the inner city. And that arc is made by the digital hub, again, which is emphasizing digitally traded services. 100 companies building off the image of Media Lab, which went in here, was a bit of a failure, but did inspire the creation of Digital Hub, which is using leftover lands from Guinness. And again, there's a huge future. There's digital hubs in cities all over the world, but very few of them are embedded in the old fabric of the city, which makes this really interesting here. And of course, down from Digital Hub, the new National Children's Hospital will again emphasize the intensity of employment and excellence. Here we have Grange Gorman. Stephen already referred to the fact that I sit on the board up here. This is really a magnificent project. The urban design plan has won awards in North America by Moore, Rubel, Udall, and will be home for the 6 constituent colleges of the GDA, Dublin Institute of Technology. And the plan is very green. It retains the large area of open space to the bottom of the slide there, and has these 5 fingers that structure the divisional lines between the huge quad buildings that will be the home to those colleges. So in a sense, we're waiting really for Grange Gorman to fill out the northwestern flank of the inner city. Smithfield has been ailing a little bit, and it needs more people, more footfall, and Grange Gorman will certainly deliver that. Moving then down to the east of the city towards Docklands, we start off with this area that was old Portlands. It started off in about 1986 with the Custom House Docks Development Authority. Phase 1 there, which is to the left of that slide, was very much predominantly office. Didn't have a huge amount of residential or other uses, had a nice public domain. But as you moved into the section on the right-hand side of the slide, it became a lot more urban, and the mixed use was a lot more successful. There's about 20,000 people employed in the heart of that slide we're looking at there now. And that's an example of the quality and character of the housing that emerged in phase 2 of the IFSC. And 20% of this scheme is social housing, which in my book is a definition of success when you can't tell it from the private housing. That section was also very brave in creating a new route, a new urban street from Mayor Square back down to the river, the Camshires as we call them. So for the last year I've been working on this SDZ. Docklands is being dissolved. They did huge work, we acknowledge that. Made one mistake in taking a partnership element in the glass bottle that was bought at 460 million, and they became insolvent when property prices collapsed to about 40 million for that site. So Dublin City Council is taking over Docklands. We've been charged with drawing up this strategic development zone plan. The government, in setting Dublin City Council as the responsible agency, stressed job creation, the importance of retaining the brand for Docklands, enabling fast-track planning schemes, and the huge area of importance of social regeneration. This slide merely shows what has been built in brown, which is 38 hectares, and what still is to be built in blue, which is the 22 hectares. And you're looking at the old Section 25, partly built north of the river between the new conference centre in Point Depot and areas around Grand Canal Dock on the south side. We're also looking at the area outside of this SDZ. Docklands Development Agency looked after a total of 600 hectares, which includes all of Ringsend, Poolbeg, the area of East Wall on the north side, and so on. And we're also charged with looking at the range of plans that will be required for that area. I think the important thing about Docklands is the fact that we are connecting the city with the sea again. There was talk of the port moving out a couple of years ago. That's not going to happen. Most of the interesting cities in the world combine their ports and their new residential areas in a very interesting fashion, and I think we will also do that here. The media probably have a very vicious sort of attitude to some of the things down here, including, of course, the glass bottle, and perhaps rightly so. But that glass bottle site is 10 minutes on a bike from the centre of Dublin. Compare that with commuting 50 or 60 miles out into an extended Leinster. We did a huge amount of consultation during the last 12 months, all sorts of workshops, made ourselves available for 8 sessions on Friday morning with semi-open sessions, invited everybody and anybody in, tried to connect with a new Docklands community who were not really represented politically through our studio in Dublin City Council, got really interesting views there. And all of this drove the high-level themes. The high-level themes, you get back to that value system of the 6 urban themes, these are a little bit more than the 6 urban themes, but there are elements like the maritime, sustainability, innovation, heritage, that are really considered hugely important by the local population. And why shouldn't maritime be reflected in a creative way in the sense of place that is being built down in Docklands? And I won't go through this slide, but it's those high-level themes beginning to inform the translation of the physical layout of the area through the camshires, through the Lewis lines, through north-south streets and so on. We did some interesting research. These represent the clusters of economic activity across finance, legal, and the internet ICT company sector, which you can see on the bottom right down there emerging around Google. I suppose the simple logic after a lot of thought is that we need 3 scales of economic activity. We need the big companies. Google employ 3,500 people. That's extremely welcome. We need the middle-sized companies, but we also need the seedling small companies. We need an ecosystem that can handle all of those and encourage all of those. I was in an outfit called Mabos, which started off with Kings of Concrete last week. They're the most amazing outfit down there, and their theme is educational, recreational, and economic. And they built a 3D printer recently because they have the most amazing people going in from every walk of life. It's almost like a new community centre. At the same time, the fire office is trying to close them down because they have a pot-bellied stove in the middle of the warehouse. The planning department is trying to close them down. The developer is trying to close them down. And yet we are saying in our plan, this kind of creative entity is really important for the city. The strategy of the SDZ is built around 5 hubs, and it's inspired by the hub that you already have in Grand Canal Square beside the Grand Canal Theatre, so you know what I'm talking about there. It's a kind of character where you get a really good balance between residential, retail, cultural uses and public space. And you can see it in IFSC 1 and 2, but we want to develop it in Spencer Dock, around Point Village, in Britain Quay, which is down towards the end of that peninsula, and connect that by New Bridge, of course, over to Poolbeg, the Grand Canal Square, and then the area around Boland's Mills. And this slide just gives you an idea of the scale and character of what was the old city in the light brown on the left, what was the Georgian city with the Georgian squares there, you can see the big Stephen's Green in one of those, and then what is the Docklands area with its simple grid. And that grid, which resulted from the layout that channeled the river centuries ago, is now informing this clarity of block layout. And within that we have stipulated fixed elements like the height, the ratio of uses, the route structure through those blocks. That slide combines the existing and proposed new build. So there's absolutely clarity on fixed elements, but there's about 8 different infrastructures that we have to worry about, including flood protection, energy, water, waste, communications, public space, and so on. And what we have to do is roll up our sleeves and figure out how we can deliver those 8 infrastructures, which we will do through a city block rollout agreement, where we will bring all players to the table and get them to agree, and we also have to figure out who pays, and that could be strategic central government, ourselves, the private sector, and so on, or NAMA. NAMA are all over the place down here, but we've actually, there's been a benefit in terms of working with NAMA, because at least they are a state agency. They have some element of social remit. So they have helped us, and we hopefully can put some creative pressure back on them to, I think the head of NAMA got up about 4 months ago and said there was 2 billion available for joint venture and other investments, much of it which would go into Dublin Docklands. So the time for talking is over. This just is, again, looking at the total blocks, 20 working blocks and 2 on the water, because we're regarding the public, the water of the River Liffey and the Grand Canal Dock as part of the plan. It's just worth saying, I think, because it affects what you were doing this morning, that we have looked on sustainability as 3 streams. You know, sustainability in the past you might have considered to be environmental, but there's also economic sustainability and there's social sustainability, and there's constant interpenetration between those. And I suppose we did ask at one stage, you know, is this plan just a vehicle for delivering fast-track planning applications, or is it about a process? So we think it's very much about a process. So we're looking at ways of achieving traction in social, because under the SDZ we can only fund physical elements, we cannot fund programs. Dublin Docklands was hugely important in terms of funding a whole range of programs with schools and so on, paid for from profits that it made. Dublin City Council won't be in a position to do that, so you're back to your politics and funding again. And what we did under those 3 headings was to try and articulate the main elements that made up each of those 3 strands. So under social you can see housing, learning, education, neighbourhood, community facilities, heritage, maritime, public space. And then we said we're trying to build a framework that draws all of this together, that has the capacity to respond to hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure, innovation, collaboration and research, and that can relate back to the worker or the firm or to the individual family or neighbourhood. So that's the inner city, and I suppose, you know, somebody who was on our urban advisory panel, Case Christensen of KCAP, he looked at the inner city of 6 cities across Europe, and he found that the landscapes of value in Dublin's inner city, economically, socially and culturally, were far below what other comparable European cities were at. So I suppose that's part of our challenge. So some of the things I've been telling you about Dublin's inner city is really the pathway forward. We do want the diversity of character of those local character areas in the map earlier on, but we also want to create a unity, and we want to generate that unity through the public domain realm, which we have a strategy for especially. But the inner city is just one part of the equation. I just want to mention very quickly to remind you that things have also been happening outside of the city. Ballymun has been one of the biggest social regeneration projects in Europe. 2,500 people out of 2,500 homes out of 12,000 homes have been rebuilt. 3 new neighbourhoods, 3 new parks, a rebuilt town centre. I suppose the difficulty is the job is not finished. The money has run out, more or less, and the question is, how are you going to hold what has been achieved and build on it? So just a few shots, and not far away from Ballymun, the North Fringe, Balmain, Clongriffin. Again, a very large area, greenfield sites. So after some time, it was decided that we'd make Father Collin's Park, which was just really a very basic set of playing fields at the time, be the heart of this urban area. And the idea was to create a new urban spine linking from the west, where that Hilton Hotel is, down to the new train station on the Belfast-Dublin railway line, and to create a series of what we call small urban villages or pulses along that route, and sitting either side of Father Collin's Park. Again, most of these plans are not 2-year plans or 5-year plans. They're more like 15-year plans. You know, the media, you get attacked because something is not delivered. When we did O'Connell Street, the media just gave us a really, really hard time because we did it all in 3 or 4 years, whereas we intended to do it in 10 or 12 years. And okay, we've run into problems economically, maybe only 30% of the North Fringe has been built, but there's been front-loading of really important infrastructure. That park was funded to the tune of about 20 million. The railway station was built. A lot of other community facilities were also put in place. The problem was there were too many pockets not connected. So the recent LAP has set about trying to look at the weaknesses of what was in the former plan, which was really about too much emphasis on the making of the plan and not enough on implementation, and hardly anything about thinking about the operational life of that area afterwards. So a lot of very simple, direct, practical stuff is going in now in terms of working to take down those hoardings, create green routes, and begin to make it attractive for people to walk around the area. Seems to be frozen. This one is Pelletstown, which is just, I suppose, north of the Phoenix Park. And I should say that the North Fringe eventually will have the capacity for 7,000 homes. There's sites retained for 3 national schools and a second level school in the Fingal side in that area. In the Pelletstown, we're talking of 100 acres here, about 4,000 homes. It's made up of 2 villages, one at the east side and one at the west side. Both will be eventually served by rail stations. And again, there's a site reserved for a national school in the middle of this area. And I suppose then we had the crash. And big questions over planning and almost who are we as a society and as a city. A whole load of important infrastructure like the Dart Underground, which would have linked Spencer Dock by way of Stephen's Green, sitting under the civic offices and heading to connect down with Houston and so on, has been deferred. You know, the city is absolutely congested, needs that kind of infrastructure, but we have to sit for a while quietly. Big difficulties over funding, a load of developers just out of business. And there seems to be burnout in this as well. But it's also asked questions over city leadership and the role of planning and that question of urbanism. And part of the response has been the setting up of the Creative Dublin Alliance, which actually brought the 4 local authorities in the Dublin area together, the 4 main universities. And it's broken into 4 segments, if you like. One is the university sector, the local authority sector, number 2, business, number 3, and what you might call communities of practice, number 4. And rather than a talking shop, it's been about real projects. It's about looking at Dublin as a trialling and prototyping city. And it's about trying to connect with the research capacity of silos within the multinationals, but also within the universities that's locked up and it's not connected with Dublin City. And what we actually wrote a couple of years ago was a document, 16 challenges facing the Dublin City region. And it really was a teaser for the Creative Dublin Alliance. And it dealt with a load of things I'm talking about here, the challenge of the inner city, of the Georgian fabric, of social marginalisation, of neighbourhoods. But number 1 challenge was a creative citizen in a creative city. And each challenge had a page. It was divided into 4 sections. There was a reflective paragraph thinking about what does that topic mean. Then issues, maybe 8 or 9 bullets associated with that particular challenge. Then a statement of intent. What are we really trying to aim for? And finally, 8 or 9 or 10 research bullets of what you wanted research to look at for you. So as well as outlining what the challenges facing the Dublin City region are, it outlined the key research elements that we need. One of the most interesting aspects of the projects was the Designing Dublin, which actually brought volunteers from the private sector together from multidisciplinary backgrounds, working with people from departments within the local authorities, mostly within Dublin City Council. So in the first Designing Dublin, which actually looked at the North Fringe, it was discovering the hidden meaning of place. And the whole thing was really led by a very strategic approach to design, which was, rather than going in with a solution, it was about discovery first, understanding second, about ideation third, what areas might begin to work in terms of scenario, prototyping then, finding a prototype to put something into action, and then implementing that prototype. And the second project was Love the City, which looked at the inner city. And the Designing Dublin was led by a woman called Vanessa Al Watson, who was from the Institute Without Boundaries, a design school in Toronto. We've developed a really interesting relationship as a city with this school. They looked at a neighbourhood in Toronto first year. They went to a mining town in South America second year with their students. The third year, they looked at Markham in Toronto, which is the home of IBM in North America. And then they came to Dublin this year just gone by, where they looked at service delivery in the 21st century city and worked with our studio. And we really had to roll up our sleeves and get in there and get into a whole series of workshops with DIT, who actually set up a master's to accompany this particular initiative. Pivot Dublin you might have heard about, but it was the pitch from Dublin for World Design Capital. Dublin didn't really think it had a great design community, but it has, and it's very fragmented, and creativity is across many different sectors. And it put together this fantastic book, and we got third out of 56 cities. We were beaten by Durban, and we think it had to go south of the equator that year, and that was one of the reasons we were beaten. But it actually uncovered 4 qualities of Dubliners, which was conversational, storytelling, empathic, and irreverent. And it's leaving a legacy behind, because it's been used to run Dublin Design Week. All sorts of interesting challenges are being mounted through the resource of this constituency of designers that didn't know they had a family before this. And this was just looking at the kind of themes that Pivot Dublin was looking at. So I just want to finish by looking or thinking about some of the challenges that CDETB might respond to. I did start off thinking about the neighbourhood, and your school is always site-specific. It's always geographically located somewhere, and maybe it's part of what you do very well already, but you could follow that strategic design thing of discovery, understanding, ideation, and maybe look on your neighbourhood as a partnership where a philosophy of open source, that the co-production of the city in the future is going to get stronger all the time. Collaboration is central to sustainability. We're part of a COST program initiative. Your COST has been run for 15 or 20 years in Europe. It's a federation of scientists. And we started looking at the space. It's led by Dublin, between urbanism and technology, on the basis that big data is manipulating, I suppose, the situation and producing products that people don't always need, and people's needs are not met and not central. So this project is actually trying to discover what people's needs are, and one aspect of that, which I chair, is the City Sounding Board, which is exactly what it is, looking at 5 neighbourhoods in 5 different cities and taking the pulse of what you might call collaborative urbanism. It may be weak, non-existent, or it may be interesting with lots of stories to tell. We have to find out. And I suppose so neighbourhood and collaboration 2, research 3. I don't know whether you think in terms of putting pressure back to the universities or to your teaching schools. I remember hearing in Chicago last week that students look to their teaching schools as a consultancy service. But we're also beginning to look at our universities as huge resources where they tend to do just critique alone. We'd like them to go a bit further and begin to think about creative interventions and solutions. So that's a very interesting area, I think. Infrastructure for you is always important. You have some amazing new buildings and new schools, but you have some pretty needy infrastructure as well. So even though I do sit on the board of Grange Gorman, there's a load of really interesting DIT buildings in central Dublin that really probably should go to organisations like yourself, because you're actually doing the kind of work that nobody else is doing. You just think of any other institution or agency, and they don't cover the breadth of areas that you have to look to. And then part of that is funding and politics. You tell your story, but maybe you don't tell it well enough. And to actually make a better city, those 6 urban themes reduce really to livelihood and livability. Frequently, the emphasis is always on livelihood, the job side of the equation, which is great. But the livability side of Dublin is equally important. And if we don't actually marshal, our collective resources and intelligence to produce a better city, I don't even think we're at the races in terms of calling ourselves a smart city. So the final point I'd make is that that maybe in terms of, okay, your central focus is education, but maybe you should think about trying to build for yourselves, and in terms of collaboration, a social sustainability city framework in which you position education centrally. You outline your multiple challenges, but you also position critically connected areas like health, housing, and food. So thank you very much for your attention.